Okay, today's daf is daf Yud Beis. We're going to start on daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. Okay, 2 lines from the bottom, daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Again, we're talking about the idea. If you think you're marrying a basula, let's say you think you're marrying a basula, and it turns out after the first night you find out she's a ba'ula. So what's the din with that? Is it a mekach ta'us, and therefore the whole marriage is over, or is there ksuba still? You just look at her as a ba'ula and not a basula, and she gets at least the ksuba of a mana. So we see over here like this: Kansa rishon l'shim nisuin. A guy married a lady, and they had a chuppah. V'yeshla edim shloi nistera, and there's edim that said that they never had yichud. In other words, they never went to the yichud room. And then he gave her a divorce. So she's a basula. She went through the chuppah process, but there's edim that they never had relations with each other. Inami, even if nistera, even if there's people saw them go together into a yichud room, but they didn't stay the time that it takes to do an intercourse. So, the photographer said that we need to take pictures. So all that is, she's still a basula. If the first husband divorces her or dies, ein hasheni yochel litin tanas basulam. The second guy that marries her can't say, "Oh, I was marrying her as a basula." You can't say that. Why? Shahare knas arisha, because you know for a fact she went to a chuppah. If she went to a chuppah with the first guy, even though there are edim that said she never had relations with the first guy, the second guy that marries her cannot assume that she's still a basula. Therefore, Amar Rabba, we go to Yud Beis and Aleph, Zoysemeres, this proves it. Konso becheskes basula, if a guy marries somebody as a basula, the nimtzes beula, yesh lo ksuba moneh. If you think you're marrying a basula, and then it turns out that it's a beula, so then you don't say, "Oh, the marriage is over. You fooled me." No, there is a ksuba moneh. She gets a ksuba like you're marrying like an almona, but she doesn't get the full basula ksuba of 200. Now, why? Because this guy really, if you think about it, when he married her, he's thinking he's marrying a basula because he heard from the Edom that said, "Hey, that she never had relations with the first guy," and yet. We say that when he marries her, even though he's thinking basula, he still has to stay with her, and the ksuba will be a mana, the second guy. Rav Ashi will tell you, less lo klal. I can really tell you that if somebody thinks he's marrying a basula, and it turns out she's a ba'ula, there would be a ksuba. Okay, there would not be a ksuba. It's really she fooled him, so therefore there would not be a ksuba. V'shane hacha over here is different because the second guy, fooled himself. Why is he thinking basula? Share knas rishon. The first guy already brought her into chuppah, so that proves that she's not going to be a basula. So why were you thinking basula? So if you fooled yourself, it's not a mekach ta'us. But if you go and marry a regular girl, she was never married before, thinking she's a basula, and then you find out she's a ba'ula, she slept with somebody before you, then the marriage is over. That's what Rav Ashi would say. So the Gemara asks a question just on the Mishnah. The question is, if the second guy married her thinking basula, and it turns out she's a ba'ula. Now, the question is, how did she become a ba'ula? Because the first marriage, there were witnesses that said she never slept with the first husband. After the chuppah, the husband died or something like that. So how did she sleep? So how did she become a ba'ula? So why wouldn't we tell the guy, listen, no, there's no reason for you to come to Bezdin because Bezdin will never absolve the marriage. You fooled yourself, or, you shouldn't think that she's a basula. But he should still come to Bezdin because the Nechu Shema is in Tachta Zinsa. The question is, maybe while she was married to him, she did Znus. In other words, the second guy gave Kedushin. During the period between the Kedushin and the marriage, she did Znus. And therefore, she became a Ba'ula. And if she did Znus, she becomes Aser to him. So he should go to Bezdin and try to figure that one out. Amarav Shrevya, he answered, "Kagoin shekidush uboil altar." Our Mishnah is talking about he gave kedushin. The second guy gave kedushin, and right away, give chuppah and bia like we do today. There was all one process of marrying, doing the kedushin and the chuppah all at one time. It was impossible to have done znus while she was married to him. So she's certainly not also to him. The question was, probably after her first marriage, she went to the chuppah and didn't consummate the marriage. In between the two marriages, that's how she maybe became a ba'ula. So a bottom line is, we have a machlokes between Rabba and Rav Ashi. If in a regular scenario, would you say, kansa bekeskes basula, if you think you're marrying a basula and it turns out to be a ba'ula, what would the ksuba be like? Rabba says you get at least a ksuba, and Rav Ashi says you get nothing. There are some that said the machlokes between Rabba and Rav Ashi, it was taught after they learned our Mishnah. Our Mishnah has a similar case. Our Mishnah says, Besula, the Mishnah is on Daf Yud, Besula almana grusha chalutza min ha-nesu'in. If you have a Besula who became an almana, let's say, how did she become an almana? She already went through the chuppah, or she became divorced. Right after the chuppah, the guy gave her a divorce, never slept with her. The din is, the Mishnah says a similar idea, ksubasa and mana. The ksuba is a mana. The ein lehem tanas besulim. The second guy that marries her can't say, I was thinking basula. Why are you thinking basula? She went through a chuppah. Now notice the difference between the Mishnah and the Brisa. Our Mishnah doesn't talk about there were edim that she didn't sleep with the first guy. There was just, we assume that it was that way. So the Gemara explains, Basula min asurim heichem ishkachas. What's our Mishnah talking about? How's it possible to have a Basula and she already went through the chuppah? She had a whole wedding. Answers the Gemara, Kagoin shenichnas lechuppah. She went to the chuppah, v'loy nivala, and she didn't consummate them. She didn't have bia with the guy, and she didn't have yichud with the guy. But there is no edim. So Amar Rabba, Abba Rabba said, from our Mishnah, you can see Zoysa Meres in any scenario. The second guy is a simple guy. He thought he's marrying a basula. He found out it's a ba'ula. He can't just get rid of his wife. He has to give her a ksuba of a mana. Kansa becheskes basula, benin says ba'ula, ksubasa manana. Mana. You have to give a ksuba a mana. Rav Ashi Ama, but Rav Ashi says, in any, I will always tell you, ba'alma les lekal. In a regular case, if you're thinking, you're marrying a 12-year-old girl, and you're thinking a basula, and it turns out she slept around and she's a ba'ula, the marriage is over. Why over here second guy has to keep her? V'shane hoch over here is different. Shaharei nichnasa lechuppah. She already went through the chuppah. In other words, she already went through the chuppah, and therefore, what's the second guy thinking that she's still a basula? He fooled himself. So that's why in this scenario is a little different. You get a ksuba mana. So the Gemara says, let us be concerned that he should still come to Bezdin and find out when did she do znus. If she didn't sleep with the first guy she was married to because she only went to a chuppah and didn't have yichud or bia with him, then when did she become mazana? Perhaps when the second guy gave kedushin. After that, she did znus. If she did znus right after she got kedushin from the second guy, then she's also to remain with the second guy. So he should run to Bezdin to clarify exactly when she did znus. The second guy did kedushin and bia right away, like we said before. So there was no time. She's certainly not also to the second guy because the second guy married her, did kedushin and bia right away. She must have slept in between after, the first husband divorced her. After the chuppah, she may have, mizana with somebody beforehand, which would not answer her on her second husband. So the Gemara says like this. Man, the Masan La Brisa, the one who had the machlokes between Rabba and Rav Ashi on the Brisa, Kolshkein Amar Snisin, that will be certainly on the Mishnah. If Rabba holds that Konsa B'Cheskel means B'Ula Yesh L'Ksuba Mana, Rav Ashi can tell you that that Brisa is different because there were edim that therefore he fooled himself. Even though they were edim, and he fooled himself, still there's ksuba mana, but in a normal case there is no ksuba mana. But Kolshkein Amas Nisan, Rabbi Ashi would hold his opinion, certainly in our Mishnah, when there is no Eidim. So why is he being, what, he didn't fool himself? Oh, of course he fooled himself. One that said that Rav Ashi said his scenario on the Mishnah, ala Braisa loy. Maybe by the Braisa, he would hold that Rav Ashi will say that no, the marriage is absolved. He will say in such a scenario, I was soymech on the Eidim, and therefore I relied on these Eidim, and because of that, I had good reason to think she's a basula. She really fooled me because I have Eidim that validated that she's a basula. When I married her, the second guy married her, he married her basula. So maybe in that case, Rav Ashi will held you get nothing. Only in the Mishnah's case where there was no Eidim, therefore Rav Ashi said you get a mana. But in the case of this brisa, you would get nothing. It would absolve the marriage. Okay, so just walk away from the sugya is that there's a machloikis. That always remember, if you marry a woman and you're thinking she's a basula and it turns out to be a ba'ula, according to Rav Ashi, you get nothing because she fooled him. And according to Rabbah, you would get something. What would you get? You would get at least a mana. The marriage is not absolved. New Mishnah. And the Mishnah is talking about in Yehuda, in the part of Israel that belonged to Shevet Yehuda. Israel was divided into 12 parts. So the part where Yerushalayim, around south of Israel, that's where Yehuda was. So the Mishnah, they had a minig that they, after the Kedushin, they would have the while they're engaged, have the potential the fiancé to make out with the fiancé. They would make out with each other. And they would actually encourage them to maybe even get very, very close. Why? Because there was a rule in Yehuda, the Roman governor said that any Jewish girl that gets married in Yehuda, in that part, I want to do bia with the lady first before she gets married. So they would have them make out, so to speak, the potential bride and groom make out before the marriage, so that already the bride was a ba'ula. Or even if she, they didn't make out totally, when she would actually have znus with the governor, she wouldn't be too fully into it. So therefore, it wouldn't be a bemazed. So the Mishnah says like this: Ha'oichel eitzel chama b'Yehuda. Guy is engaged to a girl in Yehuda, and he's eating a meal by his father-in-law. That meal was, like a romantic meal with your new kala, and the idea was that you would make out with her. So shloi be'edim, and there's no witnesses. So therefore, when he goes to the chuppah with this lady, and he finds out the next morning, oh, she's not a basula, eina yochel litin tanas basulam. He can't say, oh, I was thinking of marrying a basula. You made her into a ba'ula by fooling around with her. You made her into a ba'ula because you're secluding yourself with her, and you made her into a ba'ula, and that's why she doesn't have. That's why you don't have tainus basulim with this lady. Okay, so that's what the din. That was the funny thing about Yehuda in that part of the country of Israel. So the Gemara says like this: there's a big area in Israel called Yehuda, belonging to Shevet Yehuda, but not every place in Yehuda did the bride and groom make out with each other. Midik tani ha'oichel, that if they have a meal, miklal the ikter duchta b'Yehuda nami de la'ochel. There are places in Yehuda that they didn't make out with each other, and therefore, in those cases, then he would have tanis basulam, because the idea of making out with each other was that the groom made this girl into a ba'ula. He maybe forgot or whatever. But if they never make out with each other, and even if it's in Yehuda, then he could have tainus basulam. Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Shmami na b'Yehuda, nami mekomis yesh. There were different places in Yehuda. Some encouraged the girls to make out with the boys, and some places they did not. In the Tanya we learned in a brisa. Amar Rabbi Yehuda said, b'Yehuda, in Yehuda, b'Rishoina, in the beginning, they would make sure they seclude as a chasam as a kala shah achas koidem knisas lechuppah. Before, it doesn't mean 1 hour. It means before they go to the chuppah, they would have the chasam and kala make out with each other. Kidei sheyehei liboy gaspa, so that she would be accustomed to him, and therefore, if she would actually be forced to do znus with the governor of the province, she wouldn't be fully into it. And therefore, because she already has eyes on her future husband. Uba Galil, in Galil, they kept the boy and the girl separate from each other up until the time that they went to the wedding. That was in Yehuda. That was in the place of Yehuda where the governor made out with the girl but prior to the marriage. But then the Mishnah says, Be Yehuda, in other places of Yehuda, the Brisa says, they actually put two guardsmen, two guards. One would tap down the girl. Before they went to sleep with each other, one would tap down the girl to see if she's not bringing in a napkin or like a tissue, not a tissue, a cloth with blood on it from a bird or something like that. And she's going to say, oh, this is my dam basulam. So they, like they do in the airports, they tap you down. And then others, after they slept with each other, when they left, they would tap the chassan down so that check his pockets that he's not sneaking out the cloth with the dam basulam in it, because he's going to throw it away and then say, oh, there was no dam basulam. So echad loy, one tapped him down, the echad law, one tapped her down. So they will tap down the chassan and kala, check them out, make sure they're not deceiving each other. While they go into chuppah, and after the chuppah, they seclude with each other. In Galil, they didn't do that. In the north of Israel. But Yehuda basically is the south of Israel. The guardsmen, they would sleep in the house where the chassan and kala slept in. They were really close by. In the Galil, they didn't do this thing. Okay. Now, the Bryce, so right away you see that there are two places in Yehuda. One place in Yehuda said that the after they were engaged, they made out with each other. And another place in Yehuda was, no, they didn't make out with each other. In fact, they were that the chassan could have a tainus basulam. In order to prevent any deception, they actually tapped him down and tapped her down. So therefore, we see already that there were two places in Yehuda where they had different minhagim. If the kala would sleep with the chassan, make out with the chassan prior to the marriage. Now, continues the brisa of chol shaloi noah kamin exec. You don't do this. This custom, eino yochol litan tanas basulam. You can't have a complaint of that you don't find basulam. What does that mean? What cases are going on? There are three cases. If you say aresha, it's the first case. That means the chassan and the kala made out with each other before the marriage. So what does this price end off? If you didn't do that, you can't tie the tainus basulam. Just the opposite. Kol shenoig meboyle. What the Brises say, if you did do that and if you made out with your kala prior to the marriage, then you can't have tainus basulam. What does it mean if you did not do that? Ella aseva, but does it mean on the middle case? The middle case is kol shloi mush. The middle case says they would tap down the chassan. In other words, after the chassan left the house, they would tap him down to see if he's not sneaking out the piece. So then, instead of saying if you didn't do this custom, what they should say is kol shloi mushmash. Any chassan that was not tapped down and checked, if he's not sneaking out the cloth with the blood in it, that's what it just said in the brisa. So how does this wording at the end of the brisa make sense? Amar Abai explained. Lo'olam aresh. It's on the first case of the Mishnah, and what it's saying is like this: Utni kol shnahag. You have to correct the brisa and say that the brisa means to say if in any other place besides Yehuda had a society where after the engagement, the chassan and kala make out with each other, there's no more tainus basulam. That's what you should say. Kol shenohag, not kol shenoi nohag, kol shenohag. If you did that, there's no more tainus basulam. Amalei Rava doesn't like to check correct brises. Well, kol shenoi nohag katani, but it says if you didn't do that. So how do you can't just correct the brisa. Ella Amar Rava likes to say hachikama. This is what the brisa says. Kol shenoi nohag min galil begalil. What it means is like this: in the north, you didn't do the normal things what the north does. In the north, they didn't have the chassan kala make out with each other. But if you did not do that, and you had the Chas and Kala make out with each other. El minig Yehuda beGalil, you put the minig of Yehuda in the Galil, then you can't tie the tainis basulim. That's how Rava corrected the brisa. And Rav Ashi says, L'olam aseifa. Rashi says you can put it on the middle case of the brisa and say, instead of using kol shaloy nohag, utni kol shaloy mushmash. Any chosim that was not tapped down, he can't tie the tainis basulim because we assume maybe he's doing a deception. Maybe he walked out with the bedika cloth, with the cloth with the blood in it. So he can't tie the tainis basulim. Okay, so what you just learned, a new thing, what society was at that time. They actually had situations in certain parts of the country in Israel where they encouraged the chas and kal to make out with each other, at least in a half a way, so that either there would be a custom with each other because there was a terrible gezerah that the basula had to sleep with the governor. Mishnah says, new Mishnah, achas almonas Yisrael, whether you're marrying an almon of a Jew, of a Yisrael, the achas almonas kahanim, whether you're marrying the almon of a kohen, let's say she's a kahanis, or she married a kohen, ksubas amona, the ksuba is amona. Okay, that makes sense. You're marrying an almona. But bezdin shel kahanim hoyagoyvim lebsula arba mezuz. If there was a group of kahanim, the kahanim had their own like bezdin somewhat, and they established a custom that if you're marrying a kohenes, right, a daughter of a kohen, you have to pay 400 zuz instead of the normal 200 zuz for a basula. If she comes from the kohenes family, a kohen family, she gets 400 zuz. And because you're marrying somebody special, Chachamim didn't stop them. And therefore, it became part of the ksuba if you're marrying a kohenes, that even if you forgot to write it, it automatically becomes part of the ksuba that you owe 400 zuz. Because this was the psak of Bezdin of Kahanim. You marry somebody from our family, a daughter from our family, you have to pay up more for a basula. Tana. And Tana, we learned, and the reason probably they did that is because you come from such a special family, they tried to make it harder for you to get rid of a kohenes, to divorce her or something like that. Therefore, they doubled the amount that you would pay for a basula. Tana, we learned in a brisa that even for an almanas kohanim, the almana of a kohenes, ksubas masayim, the ksuba was 200. And even normal almana gets the ksuba is almana. For the kohenes, the ksuba was 200. So they upped the ante, even if you married a widow from the kohenes family. So the Gemara says, why could the brisa argue in our Mishnah? But didn't we learn in our Mishnah, achas almanas Yisrael, achas almanas kahanim, ksubas almana, that the ksuba is almana? Omar Rav Ashi says, take the kones hava. There were two sets of rules. There were two psakim. They fixed the law differently. Mi'i kora in the beginning, takinu lebsula, for a basula of a kohenes arba me'azuz u'la'almana mana. And for almana they left it as is. We go to Amid Beis. Kaven the chazidim zalzabu. People were making light and degrading the almana of a kohenes, takninu leim awesome. They would made it at 200 because since the ksuba of an almana was almana, so if you married a kohenes, if you didn't like her, you'd give her a divorce. What's almana? And for a kohenes, it's more of a degrading act to be divorced. So therefore, for an almana of a kohenes, they made it that the takana was that the ksuba would be 200. But then they ran into another problem. Even the chazid, people saw the kaparshimine. Nobody wanted to marry an almana of kohenes. If you can marry an almanas Yisrael and pay only 100, so why would you marry an almanas of a kohenes? The Amre Adanasim and almanas kahanim, people saying, why should I marry an almanas of a kohenes? Nezel v'nese besula bas Yisrael. Let me marry a besula bas Yisrael. Ahadrin and Messiah, so they put it back to the original way, which was the almanas kohenes gets only 100, but a basula kohenes gets 400. So now the Mishnah, we learned in the Mishnah, who established this rule? Bezdin shel kahanim. So we're going to extend that rule. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Loi Bezdin shel kahanim bovad omu. It's not just Bezdin if you marry kohenes that they say this idea. Ela Amru, they say Afilu Mishpachos Hamiyuchasis B'Yisrael. Let's say there's a famous family in the Jewish world, the Kenny Lahavdil family, or something like that in the Jewish world. If they got together and said anybody who marries somebody from our family should pay more, it has a din that they can do exactly what the Kahanim did and force anybody marrying a girl from that family to pay, double the amount of a ksuba. It's not just for, and it not only probably any family. Let's say in a certain area, the whole city got together and say, we're a special city. We want our girls that if you marry our girls, you pay up for a basula. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel extended what was written in our Mishnah. So the Gemara asks, Meisivei, we have a question. Whoever wants to do like a kahan and up the ante, you can up the ante of the ksuba. Kagoin, Bas Yisrael a kohen. If a Bas Yisrael is marrying a kohen, then the kohen has to pay up. Now, why would the kohen pay up for this Bas Yisrael? Presumably, because, just like if you marry a kohenes, you pay up. So the kohen, if a kohen is marrying a Bas Yisrael, he also pays up. Ubas kohen Yisrael. And if a Bas kohen marries Yisrael, you're marrying into a Bas kohen family. So then oisin, they can make it, you pay 400. So we darshem. So this is what the Brisa says. Bas Yisrael a kohen, Bas kohen Yisrael, who the iketzat kahuna. From this brisa, you only see that only if one of the sides is a kohen, then you could up the ante of the ksuba. Of a Bas Yisrael, but a regular Bas Yisrael to another Jew, even if it's from even if she's from a great family, you can't up the ante of ksuba. So how could Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel say anybody could up the ante of the ksuba? Answers the Gemara, loy miboy kama. It's like not necessary even to express that. Loy miboy Bas Yisrael. It, of course, a daughter of Yisrael who comes from this super duper family and is marrying another Yisrael, she can force that Yisrael to pay up for her ksuba. I mean, if that's the rule, if the bezdin of her town says, "Oh, you marry this into this family, you have to pay up for ksuba," that certainly can be done. Because he can't tell her, I'm lifting you up. In fact, when you marry into her family, she's actually lifting you up. So you're going to pay up to marry into her. But if she comes from a very special family, but she's marrying a kohen, so maybe for the kohen, he shouldn't have to pay up for this type of girl who comes from this special family. The matzi amala, because the kohen could tell her, "Aluya kamalinalach, you're getting the advantage. You're marrying a kohen, so maybe I shouldn't have to pay up for marrying you because you're marrying me, the kohen." I would think that the kohen would not have to pay up if he marries into a special family of Bas Yisrael. Kamash Milan, no, he also has to pay up. Okay. So that's the third thing that we learned today regarding certain not all ksubas was 200. Sometimes they made it 400 if it was a kohenes or she comes from a very special family. The ksuba could be forced. They could force you to pay the ksuba 400. Mishnah says. Now we're back to the case of marrying a woman and you didn't find that she's a basula. A guy marries a woman and doesn't find any basulim. So they call her in. Hold on, what's going on? She says, "You're right. I'm not a basula." But she said, "I was raped. Mishirastani nenasti. After he gave me the kedushin, which was months before, I got raped. And his field was inundated. In other words, he got flooded. It's not my fault. It's his luck because." I was raped, and I'm not also to him because it was a rape, and therefore I'm not a basula, and it's tough nugs. Who I met, and he says, "Loiki, it's not so. Before you got engaged, before I gave you the engagement ring, you slept around, and I'm thinking that you're still a basula. And the whole thing was a mekach tois, means that maybe I'm only supposed to give you a ksuba of amana." That's what we're going to learn. That maybe I'm only supposed to give you a ksuba of amana, not 200. You have to readjust your ksuba. So who's believed in this case? Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Lezer, Oyman Namanis. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Lezer says she's believed. Why? Because she knows she was raped. She knows what happens to her body better than he does. And therefore, she is believed. That's why her ksuba will still remain at 200. Rabbi Yeshua says, we don't live from her mouth. In other words, if the whole world, the whole universe stands on people saying the truth, we don't assume that she's saying the truth. Our life is not dependent on her mouth because we don't assume she's saying the truth. Because what is she trying to do? Take more money out of her husband, right? Saying that, wait, it's not a mekach toy. It's not I didn't fool you. No, but he has a chazaka and he was the owner of this money. And if you're trying to pull money out of somebody, you have to prove it. We keep her as her stance as somebody who is not a virgin. And therefore, she fooled around before she got engaged, and she fooled him. She has to bring an ultimate proof that she actually was engaged as a basula, and later on she got raped. But other than that, if she's trying to pull money out of him and claim that he owes her a higher ksuba, she would have to prove it. Itmar. We learned in this case, we'll finish up with this last story over here. Itmar, let's say I go over to you. Somebody goes over, Reuven goes over to Shimon. He says, you owe me 100 money. You owe me money, okay? Man, he says, I'm not sure if I owe you money. So Rav Yehuda, Rabbi Huna Amrei Chayev, he has to pay the money. Why? We'll see in a moment. Rav Nachman says, Potter, you're Potter. So the Gemara says, Rav Huna, Rav Huda Amrei, they say, Chayev. Why? Bari. The guy's saying, certainly, you owe me money. And what is the guy answering back? Shema, maybe I don't owe you money. Bari Adif, the one who's certain, we believe him, and the one who's a maybe, we don't believe. So the Bari takes the one who's certain in what he's saying. He is the one that wins the case. Rav Nachman, Rav Yochanan says, Potter, you don't have to pay. We keep the money in the owner of the original owner. In other words, you have to prove yourself. Just because with your words alone saying that you owe me money is not enough to draw money out of somebody who's holding on to the money. You have to really prove it. Amalei Abayla Rav Yosef. Abaya says to Rav Yosef, Harder Rav Huna Rav Yehuda, that Rav Huna Rav Yehuda said that you always go after the person who's saying certain, the Shmuel he. That is in a line with what Shmuel said. The Tanam we learned in the Mishnah. You find a woman, she's pregnant. And she has no husband. And they question her. Ma tivu shel uberzet. What is where did this girl come from? How did you become pregnant? Maybe you slept with a goy or a mamzer. No. She says, I slept with so-and-so, and he's a miyuchachas, and he was a Kohen. So this kid is a kosher to enter Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Lezer, Menes. We believe her, and we don't say that this kid is a mamzer. No, she didn't sleep with a mamzer. She slept with a Kohen, and therefore the kid is a regular Jew. The halach is like Rabbi Gamliel, that we always say, Bari Adif, if someone knows for certain what they are, and the one that has a claim against them is not certain, the one that is certain wins the case. Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel bar Yehuda said to Rabbi Yehuda, Shinina, my sharp one. Yehuda was sharp. Would you say the halacha is like Rabbi Gamliel, even in our case, in our Mishnah? My Afru Shaina, what's in our case in our Mishnah? Afagav, the Ika, Lamema, Oika, Lamoina, Kecheskes Mari, Oma, Rabbi Gamliel, Bara Aldif. Here in our Mishnah, that's the same case. A guy comes to Bez and says, I didn't find Basulim by my wife. And she says, wait a second, I know for certain I was raped after I was engaged. I was nenas after I was engaged. And she tinus, I'm not sure. Maybe it happened before. So Rabbi Gamliel said, Bari Adif, she wins the case. So we see that we always go after the person that's saying the clear Bari Adif, the one that's clear and no certain, that wins the case, even though she's going to now force him to pay up more money. Force him to the husband now to give a ksuba for 200. So Bari Adif, even against a chazaka. So the Gemara asks a question, comes out that Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Yehuda, Chayev, he would go like Rabbi Gamliel, and Rabbi Nachman would go like Rabbi Yeshua. Lema Rav Yehuda, Rav Huna, the Amri Kam Rav Gamliel. Rav Huna that said that money li biyatcha. If I say you owe me money, he paskin like Rabbi Gamliel, bari adif. Rab Nachman, Rab Yochanan, the Amri Rab Yeshua. Rab Nachman says you don't owe anything, paskin like Rab Yeshua, that you go after the chazaka, and that the guy doesn't have to pay up unless you prove that he owes you money. So would you say such a thing, that the machlokes Amoraim is a machlokes Tanoim? Finally, the Gemara answers, Amalei Rab Nachman, Anod the Amrik Afilu Gamliel. I hold like Rabbi Gamliel. That means, in my case, when somebody comes, Rab Nachman is going to say, in my case, when somebody says money li biyatcha, and the other guy says, I don't know, you don't have to pay up. But in Rabbi Gamliel's case, in our Mishnah, we believe her. Because Atkan Loikamar Rabbi Gamliel Hossam, we believe her, Ella de Ika Migoy. She had a migoy. A migoy is a proof that she's saying the truth, because she didn't have to say, I was raped after I got married, because by saying she was raped, she can never marry a kohen in case this marriage goes under. She can't marry a kohen because she had znus. But she could have said, after we got married, I got injured and I lost my basulim. And since she didn't say that, it looks like she's telling the truth. So therefore, since I have a proof that she's telling the truth, in this case, I would say bari adav. Aval hacha, but in case somebody comes over to you and says, money li biyatcha, you owe me money, my migo ikar, what kind of proof do I have that he's saying the truth? Inami, furthermore, I've kind of like come Rabbi Gamliel Hossam. Rabbi Gamliel didn't say it in our Mishnah that we trust her, El Damina Oikma Achazaka, because we put her on the normal path. What is the chazaka of a girl? That she's always a basula up until the last moment. So we can say that she did not sleep around and that she was a basula even after she got engaged. And therefore, that is a chazaka together with the bari, and therefore we believe her. She's clear in what she's saying, and she has a chazaka that she was always a basula, so that makes her win the case. My chazaka is leilahai. What kind of chazaka does this guy have? What does guy? He's just saying, money li biyatcha, you owe me money. So he doesn't have anything. And that makes perfect sense what we answered. That you could paskin like Rav Nachman by the case of money li biyatcha, and you could paskin like Rav Gamliel. The Rav Nachman hu the Amar Rav Gamliel. Why? We go one more line. The imkein kasha hilkas al hilkasa. You have two halachas that contradict each other. The kaimelon halacha Rav Nachman bedine. The halacha is like Rav Nachman when it comes to money matters. Therefore, money li biyatcha, and the other guy says, I don't know if I owe you money. You don't have to pay up. We paskin like Rav Nachman. You don't have to pay up. In our case in the Mishnah, when she's a bari and the husband is a shema, he doesn't know what's going on in her how she became a ba'ula. That we pass like Rav Gamliel. It must be shma mina kedem sheninim. We can answer. Rav Nachman could agree with Rabbi Gamliel because the reason why you believe her is because I have a proof she's telling the truth. Either because she has a migoy, she could have said a better excuse. If she was lying, she could have said a better lie, or the real reason is because a woman is generally a basula up until the last point. Shma mina, that's the proof that it must be that Rav Nachman could agree with Rabbi Gamliel. Okay.